So I want to talk about the DWP. Now, most of you might think, oh, DWP, yeah, it's all for scroungers. It's not. I'm a disabled person. I use a wheelchair to get around. And up until July this year, I received PIP. For those of you who don't know, PIP stands for Personal Independence Payment. In January this year, I suffered a stroke. It robbed me of the use of my left hand, which meant that I could no longer self-propel my wheelchair. Because the DWP in their wisdom had decided twice already that I only qualified for standard PIP, I had to self-fund an electric wheelchair in order to be able to continue working. Had I not been able to get an electric wheelchair, I would have had to quit my job, which I'm sure that these reform types and the types that go on about taxpayers' money would have absolutely adored. I chose to self-fund my wheelchair. I paid for it using my PIP. Now, to do that, I didn't go through the Motability Scheme because I wouldn't have been able to, because the Motability Scheme is only for people who receive the higher rate of PIP. I received the standard rate, which meant I couldn't, despite the fact that I used a wheelchair and still do, I couldn't use the Motability Scheme. I had to research the wheelchair myself, and then I had to fund it myself. I had no outside help. I had to finance that wheelchair. I put it on finance over 3 years, costing me £35 to £37 a month. Since the DWP, in their wisdom, decided that because I had this stroke, I'm therefore cured, I no longer have PIP. My wheelchair is no longer being paid for out of my PIP. This isn't a sob story with a GoFundMe at the end of it to get people to pay for a wheelchair, because I'm paying for that wheelchair currently out of my wages each month. I shouldn't have to pay for that wheelchair out of my wages. It should be coming out of my PIP. But the DWP decided that because I work, I have the audacity to work at an airport from a wheelchair, but they'll overlook the wheelchair bit. I work at an airport, so therefore I'm lugging a bags around every single day, because that is obviously the only wheelchair, the only job at an airport that the DWP can conceive of. I'm not working in security. I'm not working as a baggage. I'm not working in security. I'm not working on the check-in desks. I'm not working at passport control. No, I'm not working in the duty-free stores or one of the shops or the restaurants. No, I must be working as a baggage handler. So if you're an airport worker and you work for security or any of the other jobs in the airport that aren't baggage handling, just know that if you contact the DWP and tell them that you work at an airport, their mind immediately goes to lugging bags around and chucking them onto aircraft and loading them off aircraft every single day. Because that seems to be what the DWP have decided I do. I don't. That's not my job in the airport. My job is doing check-ins. I help people check their bags in. I check their passports. I check that their face matches their passport. I check that the airline that they're looking to check in with is actually the airline they're flying with. And some of you might think, oh, well, that's a bit strange. But when you're flying out of an airport at 3 o'clock in the morning, oh, sorry, you're not flying at 3 o'clock in the morning, but you're arriving at 3 o'clock in the morning after next to no sleep because the kids have kept you awake for your family holiday to Tenerife, and you're on the first flight of the morning out to Tenerife, you are literally looking for something that vaguely matches the airline you think you booked with. And some airlines do unfortunately have similar parts of their names. And our job is to make sure that you are checking in for our flight. Now, if you've said Tenerife and we haven't got a Tenerife that morning, our Tenerife is going in the afternoon, well, we know that you're not flying with us, and we can send you to the correct airline. Or if we're close enough to that airline that it makes no difference as to if your bags go down our belt or not, and the check-in kiosks have got your airline available on it, it's all good. Just make sure you tap the right airline, because otherwise you tap the wrong airline, you scan your boarding pass, it doesn't come up. But that is my job. I help people check their bags in. I check their passports and that their passport details are correct and that their passports are in date. I also go through and help board the flights. And again, that is checking that passports and boarding passes match, that the person in front of me is the person whose passport I've got. That is literally my job. I don't handle bags. I'm not lugging, 20 kilo bags around every single day. So why my PIP was taken off me, I have no idea. And all that is the only thing I can think of is that they have decided that whatever job in the airport I do involves handling baggage, because that's obviously the only job that person at the DWP can imagine exists at the airport. There's plenty of jobs at the airport. You have administrators who deal with all the paperwork that could possibly be needed at an airport, and some of those administrators work for airlines, and in an airline that can involve helping with HR requests, because not every airline is based at the airport that they're flying from. For example, they may be based out of they may not necessarily be based out of an airport, that airline's headquarters. Very rarely that they are based in that airline's headquarters are in an airport. They usually have a separate office. So the HR never come into an airport for that airline because they're at the main head office for that airline. They have no idea what goes on in the airport on a day-to-day basis. But they have administrators in the airport working for that airline to enforce the policies that they've got and to help feed back to them if this is what's going on. We need a change to this policy. This airport is too busy for such and such a rule to stand, so it's not going to make any difference if we ignore it, so can we have it scrapped for our airport, kind of thing. So you have your administrators, you have your managers, you have your for the actual airport staff themselves that aren't employed by an outside company. You have the airport HR. Then you have all the different airlines, and they've got all their own administrators and so on and so forth. Then you have the third-party companies, the likes of Swissport, SkyTanking, DHL and so on, that provide the check-in and gate staff and the baggage handlers and so on. They also have their own management and office staff. But then you also have the staff that are on the front line. So you have the staff that help disabled passengers get to their aircraft and get on the aircraft. So they're lugging wheelchairs around on a regular basis. You have the baggage handlers. You have security personnel who are the ones that a lot of people don't like, because 9 times out of 10 they're telling you can't take that through to airside. But they're there to do their job and keep us all safe when we're flying. When you do finally get airside, You then have the shop staff, the restaurant staff, staff that are stocking duty free, and so on and so forth. You'll also have extra customer service staff. You have the people that are doing your tannoy announcements. You get to the gate, you may see the staff that you've seen at check-in with the airline, because they will also be boarding flights. You'd also then have your dispatchers, which may or may not be employed by the airline that you're flying with. You have the baggage handlers, again, may or may not be employed by the airline you're flying with, and all the other ground staff. You've got your ATC people. Now, even though the UK has two central ATC hubs, each airport has their own ATC staff, and they also work at an airport. You have the staff that work in the private lounges at the airport that you have to pay to get into. Then when you get back, you have Border Force. They have their own staff. You have other airport staff that you'll see when you disembark your aircraft. When you go through to the baggage reclaim, you'll have, if your bag is damaged or missing, you'll have a separate set of staff that deal with those claims. Or again, it'll be your own airline staff. It depends on the airport and depends on the airline. You go through and you're back, and you also have your car park and stuff. You have staff doing every conceivable job you can think of that needs doing at an airport. You also have police that work out of the airport. The airport I work at has its own police station. You have medical staff that work at the airport. There are countless jobs, and for the DWP to narrow it down to what I suspect is what they've narrowed it down to, which is baggage handling, when all the forms I've filled out and all the phone calls I've had with the DWP have made no mention of handling baggage. Now, I can't handle bags. It's literally not even in my job contract. I am not allowed to handle bags. Now, some of my colleagues, they will help out in that way, and that is entirely up to them. But before my stroke, I would help out. But since my stroke, because I've only got my right hand and arm that fully function, I can't. If I'm working on a check-in desk for a customer to check their bag in, they have to place it on that belt themselves. They have to place it with the handle up for me to attach the bag tag, because otherwise I can't put that bag tag on, because I've only got one arm. And if your bag weighs over 10, 15 kilos, I've got one arm. I can't lift that much weight. I'm not some power lifter. But that seems to be what the DWP have decided I can do. Now, I did follow the mandatory reconsideration. They again decided, no, we were perfectly fine. So it's now going to a tribunal. Now, I don't know why the DWP have decided that there's nothing wrong with me. The stroke that I had was the latest in a long line of strokes. The only difference is I didn't know that I'd had those strokes before this year. It was only after the MRI scans I had following this stroke that I found out that I'd had other strokes. And unfortunately, we don't know exactly when they happened. We know which bits of me they potentially affected, and we can match up bits of me that didn't work prior to that MRI anyway and go, alright, so your left leg stopped working around this time in 2019. Yeah, that matches up with this clot here, this area of damage here. So that potentially happened in 2019 at around that time, which is why your left leg doesn't work. You say your right leg, you've been having issues with your right leg since the back end of 2019. Well, that lines up with that. So they don't know for certain that the issues with my legs were caused by strokes, but the fact that they're is evidence that strokes have occurred in the areas of my brain that are responsible for that, does help them to go, well, yeah, that's possibly why her leg stopped working. Now, you might be thinking, well, surely when her leg stopped working, she had scans. After my right leg stopped working, there was a scan of my, after my left leg stopped working, there was an MRI scan of my brain done. However, after my most recent stroke, no one's been able to find that MRI scan. No one has any idea what happened to it. So all those doctors can do is suspect that I had a stroke because there is no sign of it. The doctors at my local hospital, no sign of it. They couldn't find it. My stroke consultant at a different hospital, no idea. My GPs, no, it wasn't sent to them either. So nobody knows what happened to this MRI. But the DWP obviously have much better diagnostic tools than NHS doctors. They must do. Because that's the only reason I can think of for them to decide that there's nothing wrong with me. That one functioning limb is perfectly normal for somebody. I'm kind of sorry, but I think for the average person, only having the use of one limb, even if it is their dominant hand, I am right-handed, so it makes no odds for me writing, but for most people, if all they had was one fully functioning limb, they would not class that as normal. They would be stating quite clearly there is something wrong. DWP don't think so. And if you are a taxpayer, and by taxpayer I mean anybody who is a consumer, because the moment you're an adult and you are buying anything for adults, so clothing, shoes, you name it, you probably pay VAT on it. The moment you are paying VAT on something, you are a taxpayer. Because that is what VAT is. VAT is a tax. And people who class taxpayers only as people who work, well, I'm sorry, you're wrong. Because anyone who buys something is a taxpayer. Because that is the way our economy is set up. And if you are a taxpayer, you need to be asking the DWP why they are so keen to drag out every single tribunal case that goes to court. When, as a disabled person, I phoned up to, it's now online. I registered online to take it to tribunal after the mandatory reconsideration came back as, nope, no PIP for you. And His Majesty's Court and Tribunal system tell you it is 6 months to court date from the DWP responding. The DWP were given until the 12th of November 2025 to respond. As you can probably tell, we're a little bit past that now. They still haven't responded. And that means that until the DWP respond, no court date can be set. Because if the DWP gets sent all the evidence, the same evidence they've already seen and decided I'm not allowed to PIP on, and go, oh, we're going to lose this case, we better pay her the PIP. They can't take, until the DWP decide one way or another, nothing goes to court. Now, once the DWP have responded, even if they turn and go, nah, we'll take it to court, we'll probably win it, they can still then change their minds and go, actually, we're not feeling really sure about this. We're feeling like we might lose, a fair bit of money here. It's waste of taxpayers' money to take this one to court. And then it stops because they then decide to take to pay the PIP. But this is wasting taxpayers' money because they lose 75% of tribunal cases that go to court. When your success rate in court is 1 in 4, that's not a good look. And it's even worse when you have a government body that is spending taxpayers' money to tell a disabled person that they are not entitled to financial help. The financial help I receive from PIP pays for my medications. That's having to come out of my wages currently. It pays for my electric wheelchair, which again is coming out of my wages currently. It pays for me to have my heating on in the winter. Again, that's coming out of my wages. But when I was getting it enabled me to make extra payments during the summer, so that in the winter I'm not worrying about whether or not I can put the fire on for an hour or so before I go to work. It paid for me to have meals because I can't stand for long enough to cook. And when you've got one hand, I mean, if you don't believe me, try cooking a meal for yourself with one hand. And you'll find that it's not the easiest thing in the world. In fact, it's near enough impossible. So it was paying for me to be able to have straightforward, quick, easy, ready meals that I just chuck in the microwave. I can go back and sit down for a bit while I wait till the microwave dings. And then I go, I've got my food. But I can't afford that now, because the DWP have decided there's nothing wrong with me. And the DWP need to realise that this is a waste of taxpayers' money. They're not treating every disabled person like they are a fraud is not going to end well. Disability is the only minority group you can join at any point in life. Most people are one accident away from being disabled. There is a 50% chance that you will get cancer. 50%, 1 in 2. If you have cancer, you are classed as disabled. It doesn't matter if your cancer is then cured. That cancer can be a disability. And the main reason it's a disability is because one of the main treatments for cancer still is chemotherapy. I watched my mother go through chemotherapy for lung cancer, and it took so much out of her. You wouldn't believe how much chemotherapy can take out of someone. And it's because chemotherapy drugs still, to this day, are not perfect. They are a generic treatment in a way. We haven't figured out how to make them completely target cancer cells and cancer cells only. So they just target everything. They go to that right area and they obliterate everything. Now, yes, that does include the cancer, but it also includes some fairly vital healthy cells. And so it's why chemotherapy patients are so much more at risk for flu, for the common cold. It will hit if a chemotherapy patient gets the common cold, it will hit them so much harder than someone who's got a functioning immune system. The same with the flu. I had to have flu shots when my mother was on chemotherapy to help prevent me from getting the flu, so I didn't pass it to my mother. Because if my mother couldn't have the flu jab because she was immunocompromised due to chemotherapy. Anyone who had the flu couldn't visit my mother because if they passed it to her, she was going to die from it because her immune system was shot due to chemotherapy. It's horrid, and that is why a lot of cancer patients are classed as disabled and they will automatically receive PIP. More so if they have a short life expectancy, usually less than 3 to 6 months. If that is your given life expectancy, you don't apply for PIP. It's automatic. It is literally your Macmillan nurse or the consultant oncologist will send that through to the DWP, all that information, and the PIP's automatically awarded. Because you have cancer, and you have a 50% chance of getting cancer. It's not because we're doing weird stuff. It's not because we're messing with genes. It's not because chemtrails or all this, that and the other. It's simply because we're living longer. Cancer is still, to this day, a disease of old age. But because we're living longer and people are having children older, in some cases, it's not a dig at people who are having children older, because that's entirely up to them. But the older you get, the more faulty your genes get. And the more faulty they get, the more problems you have related to that, and that is how you can end up developing cancer. Yes, there can be other issues. There are other reasons. For example, in the case of small cell lung cancer, that can be caused, and usually is in most cases, by smoking. It was thought for a very long time that it was only caused by smoking. We're now not entirely sure whether it is solely smoking or not, but it does predominantly appear to be a result of smoking. Not always, but can be, and mostly is. And that's not a dig at people who smoke. That's just how it is. It's in the same way that skin cancer can sometimes be caused by overexposure to the sun. And that's one of the things, and why you find it in a lot of potentially older people who started going, when we expanded, going to places like Benidorm, the Canary Islands for our summer holidays, and they didn't realise that sunscreen was so important. It's why there was, and still is to this day at times, such a big issue for skin cancer in Australia. And it's why the Australian government is so strict over sunscreen and sun protection, because they know that overexposure to the sun without that adequate protection can result in deformities of the skin cells, and that leads to skin cancer. Again, it's not always going to be the case. There can be other reasons, and we are still investigating those reasons. But cancer is disabling. A stroke is disabling. The fact that I've still got one fully functioning limb doesn't mean I'm not disabled. I've got 3 limbs that don't really work. So the DWP then turn around and say, yeah, but you've got 1 fully functioning limb, so therefore you're fine. That means because your right hand works and your right arm works, that means you can walk over 200 meters, and therefore you don't need PIP, but I use a wheelchair to get around. Yeah, but you work 12-hour days. Yes, but an airport is a 24-hour operation, and my health isn't being impacted by working 12-hour days currently. If my health was, I would happily reduce my working hours, and I would happily reduce my working hours to enable myself to have carers come in and help me, because that is the only way I would be able to have carers come in, is to reduce my working hours and only work over between a certain period. Because on my current hours, well, yes, I could have a carer come in the morning to help me, because I will also have to work 12-hour days. I wouldn't have a carer to come in at the evening, because on the hours that at-home care generally work, the earliest I could start is 10 a.m. But on a 12-hour day, that means I'm finishing at 10 p.m. Now, most in-home care staff have finished for the day by then. You might get the odd one that does some out of hours, but they're finished for the day. They've gone home. They've got their own families and their own lives. So they can get me up in the morning and help me get ready for work, but they can't help me when I get home to get ready for bed. So it doesn't work. So I would have to cut my hours down. And financially right now, with everything I'm having to pay out, because I'm not getting PIP, I can't afford to cut my hours. If I cut my hours, I have to decide that, well, I can't work anymore because I can't afford to keep my wheelchair. And because I can't afford to keep my wheelchair, I can't go anywhere. And because I can't go anywhere, that means I can't work. Now, maybe I could move into working from home, but it's not really something I want to be doing. I'd rather be at work, speaking with people face to face, rather than over a phone or over the internet. And the DWP seem to be wanting to take that away from me. They seem to think it's perfectly fine to have people sitting at home, talking to people on the internet, either via a web chat or on the phone. That's perfectly fine. It's not perfectly fine for your mental health. And the DWP need to realise that not all disabled people are going to be sitting at home doing work. Some of us work in airports. Some of us help. There is a very good chance that the same people that work for the DWP that denied me my PIP may well fly out of the airport I work at. They may well fly with the airline I work for and come through and have their passports checked by me, be assisted in their check-in process by me, be boarded onto their flight by me. At the end of their holiday, I might well be meeting their flight in, helping them locate their bags and wishing them a safe journey home. And they will not feel the slightest bit of guilt that they've taken my PIP off me because, oh, well, she's working, she's fine. Yes, but it costs me more. My colleagues haven't got the outgoings I do. They haven't got the extra cost to pay out to charge up a battery for a wheelchair on a daily basis. They haven't got the extra cost to heat their home because they get sensitive to the cold. And if any of my colleagues watch this, they will probably find that quite ironic. But as I've said to them before, when I'm at work, I don't feel the cold. When I'm at home, I feel it. If my room is at 17 degrees Celsius, I want the fire on. I want my dressing gown on. I want to be snuggled up because I'm cold. When I'm at work, it can be -4 degrees outside. I'm still wearing my short-sleeved shirt. It doesn't bother me. It's different at home. Then there's the cost for the food. And because most of my meals end up being ready meals, because I can't properly cook anymore. And the DWP have decided, oh, well, a ready meal's fine. It means you can prepare a meal. But I'm fairly sure that a ready meal where you're peeling the lid off a meal and shoving it in a microwave is not properly preparing a meal. If you ask most people, if you ask anyone, 90% of people will say that's not a prepared meal. You've not prepared a meal by just shoving something in a microwave. But the DWP class it as. They class a cup of soup as preparing a meal. You've literally opened a soup packet, poured it into a cup and shoved some hot water on it. That's not preparing a meal. A cup of soup is not a nutritious meal. You cannot live. I'm fairly sure, and any nutritionists can correct me if I am wrong, but I'm fairly sure that the average nutritionist wouldn't class living on cup of soups as a balanced diet, mainly because of the amount of salt in them. And as a stroke survivor whose strokes were caused by high blood pressure, I'm fairly sure you can understand that I'm trying to reduce my salt intake. Any meals I buy in, I'm checking the salt content of. So to then turn around to me and say that one of the highest salt diets there is preparing a meal is completely absurd to me. But that's what the DWP have decided. The DWP are wrong. They won't accept they're wrong, but they are. And probably if they search deep down enough, they'd realise they are wrong. I'm not making this video expecting the DWP to see it and do the right thing by me, because they won't. They don't care. They don't have a soul. Liz Kendall doesn't care. None of the Labour government as a whole do not care. They are busy chasing the votes of reform voters, the likes of people who see every single disabled person as a scrounger, except for that one person they personally know, because obviously they're not a scrounger. Their gran who got PIP wasn't a scrounger, so she was genuine. But the guy down the street whose disability they can't see, he's a faker. He's a fraud. So therefore, every other disabled person they haven't met must be a fraud. If the likes of Reform and their voters had their way, the Paralympics wouldn't exist, because they'd literally have every single Paralympian down as a fraud, so therefore they wouldn't be able to compete. We wouldn't have a GB Paralympics team. And that is just ridiculous. In an ideal world, disabilities wouldn't exist. And where they did exist, there wouldn't be the barriers that hold us back. Every holiday I go on is an absolute pain, because the amount of holiday companies that don't include accessibility information is ridiculous. And you have to sit, and I've done it myself when I went to Corfu earlier this year, paid for out of my wages. I sat and I went through the list of hotels that were on the booking site with a separate page tab open to cross-reference them on Google to find out whether they were accessible or not. After about 2 hours, I gave up. I phoned the booking line, told them what I wanted, and they booked. And they said, and just by coincidence, the girl I spoke to on the booking line had not long had a customer who had used the same hotel before and knew how accessible it was. And so she was able to recommend that hotel to me based off that. And it was an ideal hotel. I've since booked to go back to that hotel next year. Hopefully. I might not end up going. The holiday company I've booked with has just told me that they've downgraded the hotel and offered me 3 alternatives. Now, bearing in mind that when I booked with this company, I told them I'm a wheelchair user. The 3 hotels they've sent me, none of them are accessible. Their own website for each of those hotels literally says, not suitable for those with walking difficulties. Now, if it's not suitable for someone with walking difficulties, it's definitely not suitable for someone in a wheelchair. But I've been recommended those 3 hotels. 3 hotels that they know aren't suitable for me. But if I don't want that, I can always rebook to somewhere else. And if it costs more, we'll reduce the cost for you. If it costs less, we'll refund you the difference. Well, I'm sorry, I like the hotel I like. And what gets me is it's downgraded on their rating system, but the official rating of that hotel hasn't changed. So all that tells me is that a holiday company has made some ridiculously outrageous claim or demand of the hotel that the hotel isn't able to fulfill, and so as punishment, they've downgraded them in an attempt to force that hotel to comply with them. Now, if you were smart, you'd just find another holiday company that also uses that hotel, because there are quite a few of them. The holiday company in question is not the only one. When I was there, from the UK alone, there were 3 separate UK-based holiday companies that utilise that hotel. Plus, there's also the fact that you can book direct with the hotel. So all you do is you keep your flights with that holiday company. Might cost you a little bit more on the flight side, if you like, but if that's the holiday company you prefer, fair enough. I could always do that. I could make use of my work vouchers to get discounted flights and book the hotel separate if I really wanted to. If I was really inclined, I could use my staff discount holiday vouchers to book that hotel. Only because I booked with a different holiday company that ended up working out around the same price on their discounts for single travellers. But that's just how it is. But everything as a disabled person becomes more expensive. I don't know if I'm going to have another holiday anytime soon. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. There's a very good chance that, as much as I love attending NAIDEX every single year, I might not be able to attend next year, simply because I can't afford to go. And it's not the ticket cost that's the problem. It's because I can't. It's the travel cost that could end up being the problem. And that all ties back to the DWP. If the DWP keep insisting that a disabled person isn't disabled, it affects all of us. Because you might not be disabled today, but you may well be in the future. And you're then at the mercy of the DWP. And any DWP workers who are watching this, just remember, you're not immune yourselves. Working for the DWP doesn't give you immunity from disability. And do you really think that your colleagues are going to overlook their targets or anything to give you PIP? No, they're not. They're going to see, and Capita or whichever company it is that does all the assessments, they're not going to give up their target. They're not going to give up their little bonus for the amount of people that they've discredited and denied just because it's their workmate. Oh no, I've still got one more to do this week. You're the last person I'm seeing this week. Well, that's it, you're denied. I've got my bonus. No skin off my back. Just think about that. If you're working for the DWP, if you're working for Capita, if you're working in any capacity for a company that's involved in these PIP assessments, do you really think you'd be immune? If you were disabled, do you think that they'd give you a free pass? that they'd let you off just because you work for that company? Do you think that your colleagues would give up a bit of a bonus just to give you PIP? No, they wouldn't. And that's the problem. Is successive governments have taken the humanity out of these assessments. It used to be down to your GP, whether you got PIP or DLA, as it used to be. Your healthcare professionals would decide you needed it, and they'd send the recommendation through to the DWP, and the DWP would award it. We now have all these layers of red tape and bureaucracy on bureaucracy on bureaucracy to get through. And when that happens, and people say, oh, it's such a shame that you're a disabled person and you're not getting PIP, but you're one of the genuine ones. You're not one of those fake ones. Yes, but it's the genuine ones that get caught up when you have all these rules and regulations, and you bring in companies that give their staff targets to meet on denying of claims. And the moment you do that, the moment you start throwing money at it, humanity goes out the window. It's no longer about what your healthcare professionals think to get PIP. It's about what some random person you've never met before and will likely never meet again thinks. And they don't even know you. They'll know, at most, you'll see them for 30 minutes to an hour. Because that's how long the majority of PIP assessments take. Some of them don't even last that. Some of them you're in and out because they've already made their mind up. So what's the point of you even giving you the appointment? They make people give up time when they've made it telephone based. Oh, we're going to call you at this time, but you have to make sure you're available for the whole day because we might not necessarily phone you at the time we state because it might overrun. So therefore, we might be late phoning you. So you have to give up still the whole day just for a telephone call that lasts about 5 minutes, sometimes longer. But that shouldn't be the case. I'm sorry, but if the DWP can penalise disabled people for missing appointments, surely disabled people can penalise the DWP for not being on time to those appointments. If they cannot ensure that their assessors are making telephone calls on time, then I'm sorry, it should automatically be that the disabled person gets PIP, even just at the standard rate. If they've already got standard rate or they've got enhanced rate and this is for a follow-up, then I'm sorry, if the DWP cannot, or whoever, cannot phone on time or within a reasonable window of that time of 10 to 15 minutes, then that PIP claim should automatically be accepted. And that is just what I think. And I know some people will disagree with me and be like, oh yeah, but such and such a body. I know such and such a body down the street that gets PIP and there's nothing wrong with it. Got a car and everything. How do you know there's nothing wrong with that person? Have you met them? Are you their healthcare professional? Because if you're not their healthcare professional, how do you know there's nothing wrong with them? Oh, such and such a body gets a PIP, gets one of those multibility cards for depression. No, you don't. You cannot get a multibility card for depression. It doesn't happen. Because in order to get multibility, you have to receive the full minimum of 10 points on the mobility part of your assessment. Depression does not give you 10 points. 10 points is only awarded if you cannot, the minimum 10 to 12 points that you will get for mobility is only awarded if you cannot walk more than a certain distance. If you can walk up to 20 meters, but not more than that, you won't get more than 8 points. The less distance you can walk, and as far as I'm aware, and I'm sure a mental health professional might be able to correct me, depression doesn't make you unable to walk more than 5 or 10 meters, which is what you need to be, which is the most you can walk to be able to get the full rate of mobility. So that person you're saying you know is not for the depression. It's for another reason. And if they're not telling you, it's because they don't trust you to know enough about, or they don't know you well enough. Then there's also the fact that some people won't go through Motability to get the car. They'll self-fund it out of their PIP. They see what they're getting of PIP each month. Now, if you're in a decent enough paying job, you can fund the extra costs of your disability from your wages, and you can use your PIP to get your car on a finance agreement, and that is your own car. You don't have to, after 3 years, hand it back. You don't have to make an upfront payment of a certain amount to get the car you want, or to get all the modifications you need to do into it. Which, if I do go down the Motability route for my next car, I would have to do. Because it doesn't matter if I end up getting a little Nissan Micra or a little city type car. I'd need a boot hoist fitting to put my wheelchair into the back of the car. I'd need hand controls putting in to be able to drive it. And those cost money. So it doesn't matter if I choose a 0 deposit car. By the time I've put on all my additions that I need, I'm looking at being £4,000-5,000 in a black hole. And I've got to find that money. And that's something that people need to think about, is when you throw shade at someone you don't think is disabled, you're not just throwing shade at that disabled person, you're throwing it at every disabled person. Because what you're saying in essence is, you can look at a disabled person and know if they're disabled. You can. I'm going to tell you now honestly, with 100% accuracy, you cannot tell. You cannot tell by looking at the average person if they have a disability or not. Unless they are sat in a wheelchair, if someone is walking around, you don't know if they've got a heart problem or not. You don't know if they're autistic or not. You don't know their mental health. You don't know if they've got Crohn's disease. Unless that person has a visual aid that you can see. So, for example, a stick, a rollator, wheelchair, guide dog. You don't know. And especially when the person in question is a child. How do you know that the child in a pushchair, who looks a little bit big for the pushchair, isn't in a pushchair because your average child wheelchair is too big for them? So they have a modified pushchair that doubles as their wheelchair until they're older. And then once they're older, they'll move to a kiddie wheelchair. And as someone who works at an airport and has seen kiddie wheelchairs, even though I'm a wheelchair user myself, it's still sometimes upsetting to see, because I've been through that struggle as an adult of being a wheelchair user, and I wasn't always a wheelchair user. And for me, it's sometimes I see it and go, this is all this is all they're ever going to know is using that wheelchair. And their parents will have to advocate for them and fight for them every single time, every single day. And then when they're older, they're going to have to keep that fight going. And that's all they're ever going to know is having to fight for everything they have. And it's mostly because able-bodied people who have never been affected by disability will never know the hardships of disability keep voting in people who won't tax the rich. They won't touch billionaires because they're scared of the billionaires, because the billionaires own the press and the press influence who gets voted in. So the moment you go after the billionaires and tell them they need to start paying their fair share of tax, they go, oh no, we're not having that. And you get all the hit pieces run about all those politicians. And politicians don't want that. Or at least most of them don't. There are a few that really couldn't care less what the press have got to say. Because they know the press is owned by a billionaire class. And billionaires don't care about you and me. They don't care about the average person who's struggling from one day to the next or one paycheck to the next. They don't care about that because they don't know what it's like to struggle. They don't know what it's like to sit and work, to sit down every single month and work out where every single penny of your paycheck is going for the month. They don't know what that struggle's like. They don't know the struggle of the parent who's just had a last minute bill come in and is now having to debate whether or not they can afford to have a hot meal. They're having to debate whether or not they can afford to put the fire on, the heating on tonight for the kids to be able, so that the kids are warm. Because most parents will feed their kids before themselves. They don't know the struggle of having to phone up Citizens Advice to get a food bank voucher, to go to a food bank. They don't know what that is like, and they'll never know what it's like. But to hear them talk when you mention taxing billionaires or expecting them to pay what they actually owe in tax, you'd think they were in a food bank every single month, every single week, every single day. They don't know what a food bank looks like. They don't know what a food parcel looks like. They've never seen one. I have. And I'm sure that a few people who see this video will have. And that's something to think about when you follow these people who try to blame others. They try to blame disabled people for the state the country's in. They try to blame asylum seekers, the illegal immigrants, the people who come over on boats. And especially when the people who are throwing that blame have got more money than the average person would ever know what to do with. And they want you to feel sorry for them. Why should I feel sorry for someone who has more money than I will ever see in my lifetime? Why should I feel sorry for them? Why should I care about whether they have to cut back on the Moët Chandon? Why should I care if they have to take one less holiday on a long distance flight this year? Cut down from 5 2-week holidays to 4. Why should I care? There's people in this country who can't even get 3 days away in this country. They can't even afford 3 days away in 3 nights in a travel lodge. There's people who are living in hotels because they're homeless. There are people who are having to choose whether they put their heating on in the winter or have a hot meal. There are people living on the streets, and we're expected to care about billionaires. We're expected to care more about the likes of Elon Musk and what he thinks than we are about the guy who's sleeping rough. I'm sorry, if I'm giving out sympathy, it's going to the person who's sleeping rough. It's going to the mum who's struggling to feed her family. It's going to the parents who've got one person off sick long term because of an accident at work and are now struggling. That's where my sympathy is. My sympathy is with the family that's fleeing war and famine. It's not with the likes of Elon Musk. It's not with the likes of Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage doesn't care about me. He would happily see me on the streets, starving. He doesn't care. So why should I care about him? Why should I give the likes of Nigel Farage my vote? And I can guarantee that anyone who backs reform will not be able to come up with a coherent reason as to why I should back the likes of Farage, why I should back the Reform Party, the party that wants to make my life worse, who wants to make the lives of most people in this country worse because they've got some pathetic fantasy of being able to stop the boats. You can't stop the boats. It's not going to happen. It never will. But if you listen to these people, they have some magic formula that says it will. Just vote for them. They can't tell you how they'll fix the country, just that they will. I'd rather vote for people who have got a plan, who can tell me how they'll fix the country. And if how they'll fix the country starts with taxing the likes of Elon Musk and asking the likes of Google and Amazon to actually pay the tax they owe in this country, then I will give them my vote. I will vote for policies that actually help people, not for policies that penalise people, not for policies that hate on the disabled and those that are less fortunate than me. I've had to use a food bank already this year. There's a chance I may need to use one again before my finances get better. But I would rather do that and support parties that support people rather than the rich, because I'm sorry, at the end of the day right now, as far as I'm concerned, people actually have a level of humanity. People care about other people. The rich aren't people. The likes of Elon Musk doesn't deserve to call himself a human because he doesn't care about other humans. Unless those humans are rich like him. If you aren't in his level of finances, he doesn't care about you. He'll pretend he does in order for you to listen to him, in order for you to give him more of a voice than he's already got. The likes of Jeff Bezos will want you to care about him because you can give him a better voice. He's not going to pay his taxes properly because he doesn't want to lose his money. He's got more money than he will ever be able to spend in this lifetime. And that is the problem, is there are rich people who have more money than anyone could spend in their lifetime. And they don't want to give up that wealth. They don't want to give up even the tiniest portion of it. They don't want to pay their way. They don't want to pay towards the country that helped them get where they are. And they don't care about that. Now you could argue, oh well, Jeff Bezos is American, so therefore he should pay tax in America. Yes, but Amazon is a global company. And Amazon has quite a big customer base in the UK. But Amazon doesn't pay its full share of tax in the UK. They have an arrangement with HMRC of we'll pay this percentage of our tax. I can imagine that if I phoned up HMRC tomorrow and tried to make the same arrangement, I would be told very polite. I would be told maybe not so politely where I could stick that idea. So why does Jeff Bezos get to do that? Why do those over that have a certain amount of money get to make all these arrangements to pay as little tax as possible when the rest of us can't have that? Why is it one rule for us and then no rules for them? Surely it should be the same rules throughout. And until it is, then I'm sorry, I will not vote for anyone who isn't putting the average, ordinary person first. And there's too many parties in this country right now that aren't. And one of the biggest reasons is they keep going after the wrong people. When you go after asylum seekers, when you go after the disabled and the sick, when you go after the elderly, that's a vote loser, or it should be. If the UK were a truly caring society, these parties that talk about being tough on benefits claimants, tough on the disabled, they wouldn't get another vote again. And that's something you really need to think about is, are you voting to make this country a better place for everyone, or just a better place for the rich?